They warn you about the funeral and the holidays, and nobody mentions that the hardest 8 hours of a widower's day are the ones he's meant to be asleep for. I'm Walter, 82, retired carpenter, 9 years on my own since I lost my Helen. If you dread that room at the top of the stairs, this one is for you. Start with number 1 and stay for number 4, the one nobody says out loud. Number 1. I have slept on the same side of that bed for 9 years, and I could not tell you why. Right-hand side as you look at it from the door. Been mine since 1963. After she died, I went on sleeping there. A bed made for 2 with 1 man in it, pressed against the edge as though somebody needed the room. I noticed it in the second year and thought, well, that's daft, there's a whole bed. So one night I made a deliberate decision to sleep in the middle of it, like a sensible man with a bed to himself. I lasted about 20 minutes. I don't fully understand what happened. It wasn't grief exactly. My body did not agree with the arrangement. I was in the wrong place, plainly and physically, and no amount of being reasonable about it made the slightest difference. I went back over to my side and went to sleep. I've stayed there since and stopped arguing about it. That's number 1. Not because it's profound, but because I know a good many of you are doing exactly the same and have never mentioned it to a soul. There's nothing the matter with you. 54 years is a long apprenticeship, and the body remembers a great deal longer than the mind does. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe so you don't have to walk it alone. All right. Number 2, and I'd not fight it if I were you. I lost about a fortnight of sleep proving to myself that a sensible man sleeps in the middle of his own bed, and the body was right and I was wrong. Number 2, nobody tells you that a bed goes cold in a way that has nothing to do with the furnace. I'm a carpenter and I heat this house with wood, and I know precisely what the temperature is in every room of it at any hour. That is not what I'm talking about. A bed with 2 people in it is warm, not warm as in the thermostat. Warm because there's another body in it putting out heat all night. And you have been in that arrangement so long that it isn't a comfort. It's simply the temperature that beds are. Then there's one of you, and a bed is about 11 degrees colder than a bed has ever been in your life. And nobody tells you this in advance because it sounds like nothing when you say it out loud. It is not nothing at 3 in the morning in Maine in February. I did the daft things first. Everybody does. I put another blanket on, which does very little because a blanket only keeps in the heat you're making, and one old man makes about half what 2 people made. I turned the thermostat up, which cost me money, and didn't touch it. What actually worked was a hot water bottle, and I want to tell you how I came to it because I resisted it for about a year on grounds of pure foolishness. I thought it was a thing for children and invalids. That was the whole of my objection, and I'd not have said it out loud. It was Marie who put me onto it. She was married to a friend of mine named Bob, and she's 9 years into the same business I'm in, and we have lunch about once a month. She mentioned it in passing over a sandwich, entirely matter of fact, the way you'd mention a good sort of screwdriver. I bought one that week. Rubber from the pharmacy in town cost about $11. 9 years on it goes in at about 8:30 every night from October to April, down where my feet go, and the bed is warm when I get into it. $11. A year of being too proud. And I've since found out, I asked the young librarian in town to help me look into it, because once I'd noticed the cold, I couldn't let it go, that the getting warm is a good part of how a body gets itself to sleep. Something in the warming and then the settling. I couldn't explain the mechanism to you, and I'd not try, because I'm a carpenter and not the man to be explaining bodies to anybody. I only know that $11 fixed a thing that a raised thermostat and 2 extra blankets did not. And there's a second half to number 2 that I'd not have predicted. The bottle goes in at 8:30, which means that at 8:30 every evening for 6 months of the year, I do a small thing for the man who's going to get into that bed at 9. That turned out to matter a good deal more than the warmth. Because it's somebody thinking of him, and there is nobody else in this house to do it, so it has to be him, 12 minutes earlier. It's a daft thing to be moved by, an old man filling a rubber bottle at a kettle. But 9 years on, I've come to think most of living alone, well, is exactly that. The fellow at 8:30 looking after the fellow at 9, and neither of them having anybody else about. I'd say to anybody in a cold bed, go and get one. $11, any pharmacy, and don't spend a year being too proud about it the way I did. There is no audience. Nobody's going to see it. That's the whole trouble with living alone. And it's also the whole freedom of it. And I'd add one more thing about the cold. Because it isn't only the bed. The whole house is colder than it was, and the furnace has nothing to do with it either. Two people heat a house in a way that has no thermometer. The cooking, the moving about, the doors going, the general business of a building with somebody in it. I turned the thermostat up by 3 degrees in that first winter, and it made no difference whatever to how cold this house felt, and it cost me a considerable amount of oil. What actually warmed the house was using it, cooking a proper supper on the stove rather than heating something. Having the wood stove going in the evening instead of the furnace, because a fire is warm in a way a radiator isn't, and I'd not try to explain the difference to an engineer. Having people in, occasionally, which does more for the temperature of a house than anything I've found. I'd say to anybody in their first winter alone, don't reach for the thermostat first. Reach for the stove and the kettle and the wood. The cold you're feeling is very likely not the sort a furnace fixes, and you'll spend the whole winter and a great deal of money finding that out. Before the next one, tell me in the comments what time you go to bed and what time you wake and whether you sleep through. Just those. I'd like to see them, and I think a good many of you are going to find you're in far better company than you thought at 4 in the morning. I read every single comment and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else lying awake tonight. Number 3, nobody tells you that you will keep listening. That's the one that took me longest to name, and it explains about half of my first 2 years. Here's what I mean. When there is another person in a house, some part of you tracks them without your permission. All night. You know she's turned over. You know she's got up and gone down for a glass of water. You don't wake for any of it, and you don't think about any of it, but the monitoring runs, and it has been running every night since 1963. Then there's nobody to monitor, and the machinery does not shut off. It goes looking. It listens to the house instead, because that's what's available, and it finds a very great deal because a 53-year-old wooden house makes noise all night. So I lay in that bed for 2 years, in a state I'd call being on duty, listening to a building. I did not know that's what was happening. I put the not sleeping down to grief, and a fair amount of it was grief, and a fair amount of it was a man standing guard over a house with nobody in it. What fixed it was learning the house. I went round it over about a season, room by room, and I made a list of what makes noise and when and why. The frame ticks when the temperature drops fast. That's the joints working, and on a January evening you can hear this whole building settle over about an hour. The third stair creaks and has since 1978. The east window rattles in a north wind and doesn't in a west one, which means I can tell you where the weather's coming from at 2 in the morning without opening my eyes. And there's a place under the front sill where the ground heaves in a hard freeze, twice a winter, and it makes a sound that is exactly a man's boot on a floorboard. I found that one out the hard way, and I've told that story elsewhere. Nothing changed in this house, not a board. What changed is that the monitoring had something to compare against, and a noise with a name doesn't wake a man. I sleep now. Not perfectly. I'll come to that, but I'm not on duty, and I hadn't understood until it stopped how much of my night had been spent working. Now, there's a second thing the listening does, and it's worse than the noises, and I've not heard anybody describe it. You go on listening for her, not for a burglar, for her. The machinery was built over 54 years to track one particular person, and when that person stops, it doesn't retire. It keeps its post and reports nothing all night, every night. And what that produces in the small hours is a specific and constant sense of waiting. I could not have told you what I was waiting for. There was nothing to wait for, and I knew it perfectly well in daylight. But at 2 in the morning in that bed, there was a man listening for a sound that was not coming and had not come since October of 2017 and was never coming again. That's an exhausting way to spend a night, and I did it for about 2 years. I've been reading about this sort of thing for a good while. The clippings are in a drawer out in the workshop, and one line I copied out has stayed with me. It said that the body keeps an expectation long after the mind has accepted a fact, and that the two things run on entirely separate clocks. That's exactly right. My mind accepted it at the funeral. My body was still expecting her at 2 in the morning 3 years later. I don't know what stopped it. That's the honest answer. It wasn't a decision, and there was no night I can point to. But somewhere in the 4th year, I noticed that I'd stopped waiting. And I noticed it the way you notice that a noise you'd got used to is gone. There is one thing that I think helped, and I'll offer it for what it's worth. I started saying goodnight to her out loud. That's a habit I've talked about elsewhere, and I'll not do the whole of it again. But I'd say this about it in the context of sleeping. It puts an end on the day where she's concerned. Before that, she was simply unfinished business every night. A person I'd been with for 54 years, who had not been accounted for. And some part of me kept the ledger open. 2 words at the lamp, and the ledger closes. Good night, Helen. And then it's a man going to sleep rather than a man waiting for something. I'd not have believed that at 74. I'd have said it was foolishness, and I'd have been wrong. And I was wrong about a good many things at 74. There's a third thing about the listening that I'd add for anybody who's newly in it, because it caught me out badly and nobody had mentioned it. The house sounds different when you're the only one who can respond to it. Same noises. But when there were 2 of us, a sound at 2 in the morning was a shared matter. Either she'd heard it too or she hadn't, and either way there was somebody else in the arrangement, and I could nudge her and say, "Did you hear that?" And she'd say, "It's the pipes. Go to sleep." Alone, every sound is entirely yours. There's nobody to check it against. And a man with no second opinion at 2 in the morning will believe almost anything his own head tells him, which is why the ice under my front sill got me out of bed with a hammer in my hand in the second winter. That's what the list actually gave me. Not silence, a second opinion. The list is the wife who says it's the pipes, go to sleep, written down in daylight by a man who was thinking clearly. I keep it in the drawer of the kitchen table. I haven't looked at it in 5 years, and I know every line. There's one more piece of this that I want to give anybody who moved house after they were widowed, because a woman wrote to me about it, and I've thought about her letter since. She'd sold up and gone to a smaller place near her daughter, which was very likely the right decision, and I'd not second guess it. And she said the not sleeping had got worse rather than better, and she couldn't understand why, because the new place was warm and safe, and there was family 10 minutes away. I'd say it's the listening. She'd taken a machine that had spent 40 years learning one particular building and put it in a building it knows nothing about. Every noise unexplained. Every one of them a candidate. That's a hard start, and nobody warns anybody about it. What I'd have said to her, and did, is that the list works anywhere. It's actually more useful in a house you don't know than in one you built yourself, because you've got further to go and more to gain. One noise at a time, in daylight, over a season. Ask the neighbor what that pipe does in October. Somebody on that street has heard it from their own bed for 30 years and will tell you in about 4 seconds. Ask the daughter. Ask whoever's about. There's no shame in it, and there's a great deal of sleep in it. She wrote back in the spring and said she'd got about 9 of them identified and was sleeping better than she had since the move. 9 noises. That's the whole intervention. And it's the reason I'd say to anybody thinking of moving, it isn't only the rooms you'd be leaving. It's about 40 years of knowing what a building does at 2 in the morning, and that's not on the estate agent's list, and it ought to be. We're one away from the one I promised you. Number 4, the one nobody says out loud. Stay with me. Number 4. Nobody tells you that you will miss being touched and that this has nothing whatever to do with what people will assume you mean. I'm going to say this plainly because I've never heard anybody my age say it, and I've come to think that silence does a great deal of harm. 54 years of sleeping beside somebody is 54 years of contact. Not romance, contact. A hand on a back, a foot against a leg, somebody shifting in the night and settling against you, waking up with an arm gone dead because she'd fallen asleep on it and you hadn't the heart to move. That is roughly 19,000 nights of another human being physically present in a bed, and it is the most ordinary thing in the world, and it stops absolutely and completely in one afternoon. Now here is what nobody tells you. Nobody touches an old man. That's the whole of it. I went, in that first year, months at a stretch, without another human being making contact with me at all. Not a handshake, not a hand on the arm. Months. And I did not notice it for a long time, because it isn't the sort of thing a man of my formation would put words to, and because it doesn't announce itself. There's no day it happens. You simply find, at some point, that something in you is very tired in a way that sleep is not fixing. I want to be careful here because I know how this can be heard. I am not talking about wanting a woman. I'm 82, and I'm not looking, and I've been clear about that, elsewhere. I'm talking about the plain animal fact that human beings are meant to be in contact with other human beings, and that a man living alone at the end of a driveway can go a very long time without any, and that a bed is where the absence of it is loudest because a bed is where all of it used to be. Now what I did about it, for whatever it's worth, and it isn't much, and it's the honest answer. The first thing is that I stopped pretending I didn't notice. That sounds like nothing, and it was most of it. Naming a thing takes about 80% of its weight off, in my experience, and I'd carried that one unnamed for 3 years. The second is that I stopped avoiding what little there is. Elaine from down the road puts a hand on my arm when she leaves. She has for years, and I used to more or less get through it, the way men do. I don't anymore. I let it be what it is. My son hugs me now, coming and going. He didn't when he was younger. He started after his mother died, and I have never once mentioned it, and I hope to God he doesn't stop. The Sullivan's little one grabs my finger with her whole hand, which children do and which is worth more than she'll ever know. The fellow at the diner shakes my hand on a Saturday. That is the entire supply. It amounts to perhaps 4 or 5 contacts in a week, most of them lasting under 2 seconds, and I'd have told you at 70 that it was neither here nor there. It is not neither here nor there. It is the difference between a man and a man in a glass case, and I only found that out by going without. And I'd say this to the sons and daughters who watch these, and I know there are some of you. Hug your father. He will make a face about it. He is a man of a certain generation, and he will not know where to put his arms, and he may say something to deflect it. Do it anyway. Every visit, coming and going, whether he seems to want it or not. Because there is a considerable chance that you are the only person who touches him, and he will never in his life tell you that, and the arithmetic on that is worse than you'd guess. I'd not have said any of this 10 years ago. I've decided at 82 that there's no sense in me being the 100th old man to go quiet about a thing that half the people listening are living with. Now, I want to give the practical part because I've named a problem and left it there, and that's no use to anybody. The first thing I found is that a good deal of it is available and refused. That was the discovery, honestly. I'd been thinking of it as a shortage, as though there simply wasn't any to be had at my age in my situation. That was not true. There was a fair amount going by, and I was declining most of it out of habit. The handshake at the diner I used to make brisk. The hand on the arm I used to more or less endure. When my daughter hugs me, I used to be the one who ended it first. Men of my sort do that. We make it into a sort of pat and step back, and it's over in about a second and a half. I don't end it first anymore. That's the whole of my technique, and it took me about a year to be able to do it. It sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. The difference between a hug that lasts a second and a half and one that lasts 4 is considerable, and it costs you nothing. And the other person will not think a thing about it except that it was a good hug. The second thing, and I'd not have thought of this myself, it came from a man at the diner, is that some of it can be arranged without anybody knowing what you're arranging. He goes to a barber every 3 weeks, and he told me he'd worked out that he doesn't especially need a haircut every 3 weeks. He goes because somebody's hands are on his head for 20 minutes, and somebody talks to him while they are. He said that out loud to me at a counter on a Saturday morning, entirely unembarrassed, and I thought about it for a fortnight afterward. I've got my own version. There's a fellow in town who does the physical bits of a body that a carpenter of 82 has accumulated over 45 years. I'll not go into detail, and he'd not want me to. And I'd told myself for years that it was about the back. Some of it's the back, not all of it. I'd say to anybody, and particularly to the men, if there's something you go to that involves somebody's hands, don't examine your reasons too closely. Just keep going. Now the third thing, and it's the one I'd most want said, if you have got somebody, a wife, a husband, anybody at all who sleeps beside you, this is the part of the talk that's for you, and it's the only part that matters. You have got 19,000 nights of it, or whatever your number is, and it will feel like nothing at all while it's happening. It felt like nothing to me. It was simply the temperature that a bed is. Put your hand on them tonight. That's all. Not a production, not a conversation, nothing that needs explaining in the morning. Because I tell you what I actually miss at 82 out of 54 years, and it isn't the wedding, and it isn't the holidays, and it isn't any of the large occasions. It's a foot against my leg in the middle of the night in about 1991. From a woman who was asleep and had no idea she was doing it. I had 19,000 of those, and I'd have told you at the time that they were nothing whatever. And they turn out to have been most of the marriage. And I'd give a good deal for one more. And there is no arrangement on this earth by which I can have it. So, tonight, put your hand on them. I'd rather one person did that because of this talk than everything else I've said in 9 years. There's a last piece of number 4, and it's the one I've been circling, so I'll just say it. You can go a very long way toward fixing this yourself, and the way is a dog. I have not got one. I want to be honest about that before I recommend anything. I've thought about it seriously perhaps 4 times in 9 years, and I've talked myself out of it every time. And the reason is arithmetic. I'm 82. A dog is 12 or 14 years if you're lucky. And I'd not take a young dog into this house without a clear answer to what happens to him when I go. And I've never quite got to an answer I was comfortable with. But I know 3 men and 2 women in this county who did. And every one of them will tell you the same thing. And none of them will put it in the terms I've been using tonight. They'll say he keeps me company. They'll say she gets me out walking. What they mean, and what one of them said outright after a certain amount of coffee, is that there's a warm thing that wants to be near him and puts its head on his knee in the evening, and that he had gone 4 years without anything of the sort. So I'd say, if you're younger than I am, or if you've got somebody who'd take him on, think about it seriously and don't let anybody make you feel foolish about the reason. An old dog for an old person is the usual advice, and it's good advice. There are a great many of them wanting homes, and they've the same problem you have, which is that nobody's touched them in a while either. That's about as close to a solution as I've found for number 4, and I haven't taken it myself, and I'd not want to pretend otherwise while recommending it to anybody else. If one of you does it and it works, write and tell me. I'd like to know, and I'd very likely read it out. And I'd say the same about anything in tonight's talk. I've been at this 9 years, and I'm still finding things out, mostly from other people my age who've worked out something I hadn't. The hot water bottle came from a widow over a sandwich. The barber came from a man at a counter. Nobody's got the whole of this. We've all got a piece. Number 5, Nobody tells you that the room can come back. This is the last one, and it's the one I'd most want somebody in their first year to hear. Helen died in that room. October of 2017, in a bed by the east window at home, which is what she asked for. And for a good while afterward, that room was not a bedroom. It was the place where the thing happened. I'd go through that door and it was October. Every time, regardless of the month. So I stopped going up. That was the first year and a good part of the second. I'd fall asleep downstairs in the chair by the fire and surface at 2 or 3 in the morning, cold and stiff, and then go up anyway, in the worst possible condition at the worst possible hour. The avoidance bought me nothing. I want to say that plainly because I did it for 18 months. I still ended up in that room every single night. I just arrived there half asleep and beaten instead of upright and deliberate. What turned it was something I did on purpose and felt foolish doing. I started putting the other days back. Here's what I mean. Lying in the dark instead of letting my mind go where it wanted to go, which was always the last 9 days of her life. I deliberately put myself somewhere else in that room. A Sunday morning in about 1983, when both children were out of the house and neither of us got up till 10. The night in 1972 when Susan had a fever and we took turns sitting with her and were useless the next day and didn't care. The row we had in 1985, which was the worst of our marriage and which we survived, and which I can now think about with something close to affection because of what came after it. I did that most nights for a long time, deliberately, like a job. And slowly the room filled back up. Because here's the arithmetic that saved it. 9 days against 19,000. That's what was actually in that room. She was there 46 years. 9 days of it were the end, and the other roughly 19,000 were her sitting on the edge of that bed, putting her stockings on, and reading with the lamp on, while I complained about the light, and laughing at something at 2 in the morning that neither of us could account for the next day. If I let those 9 days have the room, they take all of it. And I was not handing over 46 years to the worst week of my life. It's a bedroom again now. That's the plainest way I can put it, and it took about 4 years. I go up at 9 or thereabouts. I turn on the lamp on my side. I say goodnight to her, out loud, most nights. And I get into that bed, on my side, in the house I built in 1971, and I sleep. Not always. I'll be honest to the end here. There are perhaps 20 nights a year, most of them in February, where none of this holds and I'm awake at 3 with the whole of it sitting on me. Those nights happen. They happened last month. They'll happen again. What I do is get up because lying there fighting it makes it worse. I go down and sit by the banked fire in the dark and let 3 in the morning be what it is. And after an hour or 2 it passes and I go back up and sleep till 6. I don't count them as failures anymore. 20 nights out of 365 is a rate I'd have taken gladly in 2018 when it was most of them. That's not a technique. That's just what a man does, and there's no shame in any of it. Now, this is only a carpenter's opinion, and I'd say plainly that if you're not sleeping at all, or if it's been going on a long while and getting worse rather than settling, that's a matter for your doctor and not for an old man on the internet. I'm not qualified, and I'd not pretend to be. Everything I've said tonight is what worked in one house for one fellow. But I'd want to say the last piece about that room properly, because I've made it sound like a technique, and it was more than that. What I was actually doing on those nights, putting the old days back, I understand now that it wasn't about the room at all. It was about which Helen I was going to have. For 2 years I had the dying one. That's what the 9 days did. She'd been in this house 46 years, and the version I had at 2 in the morning was the one from the last fortnight. And I'd not describe her to you, and I'd not want to. And the thing about grief that nobody warns you of is that it's greedy. It doesn't take the ending. It works backward and takes the whole thing if you let it, so that a 54-year marriage becomes a story about an illness. I was not having that. That's the plainest way I can put it. and it's about the only thing in 9 years I've been stubborn about. So I went and got the other ones, one at a time in the dark, for about 4 years, and I have her back now, not the last fortnight. That's still in there and always will be, and I'd not remove it, because it happened and she went through it, and it would be a poor sort of husband who edited it out. But she's 25 in this house now. She's 40. She's 68 and irritated with me about something in the kitchen. All of it's available most nights, and the 9 days are 9 days rather than the whole of her. That's what the room came back as. Not a bedroom I can tolerate, a room with 46 years in it. And I'd say to anybody in the first 2 years, in a bed where somebody died, you can have them back. Not tonight, not by trying to feel better. By going and deliberately fetching the other days, one at a time, on purpose, the way you'd go and fetch anything. It's slow work and it feels like nothing while you're doing it. 4 years on, you'll lie down in that room and she'll be 25, and you'll understand what the work was for. So, 5 things nobody tells you. You'll sleep on your own side and won't be able to explain it. The bed goes cold in a way the furnace can't reach. You'll go on listening all night for somebody who isn't there. You will miss being touched, and almost nobody will say that out loud. And the room can come back if you're willing to put the other days back into it, one at a time, for about 4 years. I'm 82. That's 19,000 nights with her, and about 3,500 without. The bed is still made on both sides. That's not a monument, and it's not me expecting anybody. It's that I've made a bed a certain way since 1963, and I'd have to think about it to do it differently. And I've better things to think about. And I sleep in it. Most nights, through till 6 on my own side, with a rubber bottle at my feet from October to April. 9 years to get there. Every bit of it worked out alone, badly in the dark, at a cost I'd not have had to pay if one man had sat me down at 74 and said, "The bed goes cold, you'll go on listening, and nobody's going to touch you." Nobody told me any of it. Now somebody's told you. If tonight is one of the 3 in the morning ones, I made another talk about exactly that hour, what it does to a man, and why almost nothing you conclude at 3 is still true at 10. It's right there on the screen. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.